Good evening and welcome to Asking for a Friend. We've been doing this now, Be'ezus Hashem, for several years, and the feedback to this session has been overwhelmingly not just that there's a gain in hearing the answers and hearing the viewpoints and the approaches and the Das Torah of Talmidei Chachamim who spend their days and nights immersed in learning Torah, but something else as well. People tell me again and again that this session has become to them an advertisement, the best advertisement for the process of Das Torah, because you see again and again how Talmidei Chachamim, Rosh Yeshiva, Rabbeim are people who are trained not just to answer, but to listen and to hear and to crystallize and to develop and to leave people feeling a sense of such clarity and such optimism about the future. The last 10 months, 11 months has been a time of such uncertainty and such mixed messages, and you've heard so much, and one day you heard wear masks, then you heard masks don't help, and then you heard that children can transmit it, and then they said no, children can't transmit it. And then they told you that there are symptoms, and they told you no, people are asymptomatic. Against that backdrop, you so much more appreciate it. Anybody who is fortunate enough to have a Rav in their life, a Rosh Yeshiva, a Rebbe, a Rabbah in their life, and saw what it meant to be able to give answers, crystal clear answers, again, confident answers, courageous answers, again and again, understood the comfort and the serenity that comes with being connected to Das Torah. So the convention theme this year is Dafka Achshav. It's never been more important than now to have this opportunity. It's a schus to sit here today with the Rosh Yeshiva of Philadelphia, Rav Shalom Kamenetsky Shlita, the Rosh Yeshiva of Silver Spring, Rav Aaron Lapiansky Shlita, both men who are known not just as expert answerers, but as expert listeners. It's a schus to be here. Let's get underway. We'll start with Inyan Adiyayma. Question that's on everybody's minds in varying degrees, different eschais, but more or less this is the topic. Just about a year ago, on the heels of the Siyam Hashas, the Torah community was flying high. We seem to have the perfect system: Rabbanim, Rosh Yeshiva, doctors, lawyers, advocates. We were cutting edge when it came to medical care. We had relief and renewal and refuah and everything else, and so many askanim who knew we were so sophisticated medically sophisticated and committed to Das Torah. We should have been ready. So what happened? How do we explain what appears to have been the breakdown over the last 9 months? Start with the Philadelphia Shiv.
Thank you very much. It's a difficult question to answer because we're still in a state of confusion. Let me simply say that we've been blindsided. As soon as you're hit by this from the side, people were at a loss. People have not experienced this. Most of us in this generation have not experienced this. Gedolei Yisrael did not experience the Spanish flu in 1918 to the point they have some kind of precedent. Every Rav understands that information has to come from doctors when it comes to medicine, and the medical establishment was totally confused just as well as everybody else. And as you mentioned, it was not simply confused, but very, very mixed messages. Once that happens, we obviously listen and expect to take care of ourselves and do the things we have to do, which includes a total lockdown. Includes everything else that came at that time. Looking back in 2020 hindsight, obviously it was far from Pashut. Now we understand a lot more about what's going on. At that point, however, things went so much out of control. And indeed, the Rabbanim tried their best to do what they can. Every doctor had something else to say. Suddenly everyone became ID, infectious disease experts. Everyone gave their own opinion. We were totally confused. At that point, there was a total breakdown of Bichlal, thinking clearly, thinking with any sense of balance. As I said, Rabbanim were not at fault simply because the fact the medical establishment at that point knew nothing about this, the entire machla. As things came together, we began to see the fact that they were confused. Rabbanim remained confused based on the fact that they have to understand the medical information to do what they have to do. I made one point, I think, very clearly at the time, just to see it. Very often, different questions net different answers. The question becomes like a community where you have of Bnei Torah, yeshivas, chadorim, moistes, achinuch, and so on, where suddenly the question is, we have an issue. We have a community, you have an infrastructure of Batei Sefer, Batei Medrash, all the types of moistes that we know that we live with, we thrive on, the Oile Yankev, Mishkan Esecha Yisrael. We say, the question is, how do we manage to keep these open in spite of the fact that this medical establishment is saying things are terrible? And indeed, Karbonas did fall. overall, you look at the question from a broader view and say, how are we supposed to respond and react to this kind of matziv? That kind of question, that's, well, let's look at this. Look at the risk-benefit factor. The risk factor, see what is or what's not dangerous. What do doctors say, those who seem to understand the sugya? And we start collating information and come to certain maskonas where overall the benefit of what's seen and the risk factor make certain decisions. Other places, the question's asked totally differently. What do the doctors say? Any doctor understands that there's certain...
Which one is what would be an appropriate first question? What do the Rabbanim say, or what do the doctors say?
The question would be, how are we supposed to have our society function the way it's supposed to function? Everything included, as B'nai Torah, as Yidden, as Klal Yisrael, there's so many things that go into what we're supposed to have. Of course, we need the input of a doctor to give us exactly some kind of statistic and understanding as to what exactly is happening. We then take that information and run it through Shulchan Aruch, if you will, the filter of Shulchan Aruch, what's considered dangerous, what's not considered dangerous. So
Shiva's saying that even a doctor needs to be filtered through the final stop being
Most
the
definitely so. The doctor gives information, and again, especially when doctors themselves were confused. Till today, ad hayom v'ad bichlal, we're finding conflicting report as to what the mask does or doesn't do, whether schools should or shouldn't be open, whether we have, how many groups can get together, how is it indeed transmitted, what's aerosolization, all these issues are constant and ongoing studies that we call serious studies that are all conflicting. So there's a certain amount of seichel that has to be applied. Understandably, take everything into consideration. What exactly is supposed to be the outcome of this kind of question? We're not foolish. As you said, we're smart when it comes to doctors. We're smart when it comes to Pekuch Nefashos. We understand that. But there are Gidrei Halacha. There's a Shulchan Aruch. So instead of having these, so to speak, having the doctors pit it against the Rabbanim, there needs to be a certain amount, it should have been, and ongoing, it still has to be, a certain amount of information given over to the Rabbanim, coming from many different sources, of course, conflicting information, and with Seichel, and with Yishuv Adas, and with proper Gisha to understand what can or cannot be trusted. Obviously, it's from the layperson's view, it's simply it's the Rabbanim. But then, through the filter of Shulchan Aruch, to make decisions that work for the overall community. You find differences in different communities where the question was simply asked, what do the doctors say? I always had this feeling, I remember in a certain uvda, where I was told about a certain condition, the doctor told, well, 1 in 100 can get sick. And I responded, well, 1 in 100, why should I be choshesh 1 in 100? And I had an epiphanous moment. I realized I'm 1 out of 100. That doctor sees 100. So 1 out of 100 will indeed be sick. So the gisha of a doctor is totally different from the gisha of a layperson. These two things conflict. So the Shulchan Aruch tells us, take the information, and make a decision based on the information.
I think the 2 points in the question that I'd like to address. I think I just give over a story to the Chazon Ish. There was a family where the head of the family, the father, needed an operation that would either save his life or take it from him. It was a very serious condition, and without the operation, there wouldn't be much hope. And with the operation, there might be hope, but the operation itself might just leave him at the table. They came to the Chazon Ish, and the Chazon Ish said to make the operation. They did it. He died on the operating table. At the Levaya, the Chazon Ish went over afterwards to the children, and he told them, you did the right thing, and don't 1 minute regret what you did. I think somehow between the swirl of stories, our understanding of Das Torah, Rebbe's, Ruach HaKodesh, that with the right leadership, we'll predict the future. Once upon a time, like a little bit over 2,500 years ago, that was true. There were Nevi'im, and that's how it would work. That's not how it's supposed to work. The question that we need to ask is, are we doing the right thing? And like Rav Shalom mentioned, that means taking the facts as best as you can ascertain them, and then go through Shulchan Aruch. And if a decision was made one way or another way, then if it's the right decision, we did the right thing. Lives are in the hands of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So evaluating, did Rabbanim make the right decision? The question is not some statistic. The question is, bottom line, did we do what was the right thing to do? So I think that would be very helpful in helping people understand what we expect. Whether you live or not, that's in Moshe's hands. Whether Pikuach Nefesh is Deich this or this is Deich Pikuach Nefesh, that's the question, what's the right thing to do? I think that's one point I would like to sort of emphasize because I think people get it wrong. The second one, I think, I guess referencing to an article about Mashiach, Rabbi Yisrael, if we need to understand what our problem with Mashiach is, it's as follows. There is no halachic structure for halachic unity of Klal Yisrael. There is no framework where Rabbanim can and should get together, paskin with a rov, and it should have a din of Amid Laminyan. So the most we have is a community that has one kehillah, then the Merid Asra has very strong halachic standing, and yes, that's what communities should do, and that's very clear. When you have a few communities together, they can work in tandem, but they have no halachic obligation to work in tandem. So if you have a group of a dozen Rabbanim, who one person sees a certain situation as pikuach nefesh and it's asur, and one person sees a pikuach nefesh and you're mechuyev to do something, then there's no way in which one could force the other to agree or should force the other to agree. So as long as things were going on Mei Menuchos, we all agree on Torah, we all agree on yeshivas, we all agree on things like that. So there was a beautiful consensus, a de facto consensus of people agreeing to similar things. There were no real issues. This brought about genuine sharpnesses of difference of opinion. There is no way in which it can be resolved halachically. The problem is, so if you live in a town with one rav, one community, then we know exactly what you're supposed to do. If you live in a town that has a few communities and they're all together, and there's sort of a Vad Rabbanim that functions extremely tight, and they go by a majority and so on, that's also works well. But when you have Baruch Hashem, a ribu of kehillas, and Rabbanim are thinking differently, so you'll have one kehillah that says coming to minyan is Yarig Val Yaver, and one says coming to minyan is Ritzicha. Unfortunately, the rhetoric tends to become very, very hot, and there are a lot of issues with the way in which it's done. But sadly, only when Mashiach comes will we have a format where you can actually decide these things in a halachic way. So I think it's brought to the forefront the issue of be'etzim. We're not yet there. Even something as wonderful as good as Yisrael that tries to pool the talents and efforts of everybody, but when it comes to a shayla like this, there's no format that can actually obligate one side or the other.
Okay, so let me bring it down from theory to practice then, if that's okay. Just to ask. So let's say the Shiva mentioned that we have, by us, a cheder opening and a kail opening is also life. So a Rav has to make that decision. So what about something like chasanas? You don't think that the Rosh Yeshiva don't say that maybe we were a little too lax or a little too quick to just not want to be bothered with restrictions and we went on as normal with our own events?
There's no question you're dealing with the community. The community will have their own preferences. And if it comes to a chasana, there's no shayla. Each one is going to want to make the chasana the way they should. To the extent that the Rabbanim have the control, and again, there's another unfortunate situation of even when the Rabbanim do have some sense of control of how much they can control when it comes to making chasanas. So as much as they'll try to mandate to a degree with limitations, I think the government was more strong about that. So there's no question there's only so much they could do. They could suggest, they could comment. To Pascal Aloch, they said it's Meister Ritzicha of making a large chasana, probably needs a lot more, insight, a lot more understanding to be able to make that kind of psak.
I guess I'm segueing a bit. What I feel is an undercurrent in that question is to blend halacha, minhag, emotional experience has unfortunately become a blend. So a heilige chasana with the Zaydis and the Bubis and told about Shem Tov is it's wonderful to think of it that way. And when a person goes to a chasna that one should go to and he feels the dimensions of Kedusha and all the wonderful deiris, that's wonderful. But when it comes to halacha, I'm not aware of poskim that include the Heilige Zaydis into the cheshbon and the great inyan of being at that chasna. And halachic decisions, maybe it's my chinuch in the Litvish yeshivas, should be done on a very different basis. Our practicing Yiddishkeit includes a lot of that emotional part the chavaya, as they say in Hebrew, of it, which is a wonderful dimension. It adds so much chiyus, but then it starts becoming an issue about halacha. I want to just mention, because he's one of the people on the heels of his p'tira, Reb David Feinstein at the Levaya, one of his grandchildren mentioned how he never missed a minyan. There was no bounds for him to keeping halacha. When he was sick and he couldn't, whatever the doctor said, there was no krechts. This is Ratzon Hashem now. I think that's a lot. The cause. Why do we need hundreds of people at a chassan? So yes, when everything's okay, so the ribra simcha, all the heilig dimensions of it should encourage is a reimemus and so on. But when a person needs to ask himself shulchan aruch dik, then answers become different. I think it's part of the root of a lot of the issues that is an upsharenish required to have a Reivam Hadras Melech for every hair another person. I'm not sure that's from looking at halachically. Again,
okay, but everybody has their religious experience, so to speak, that they hold. Some people need Kiyah Shaifa in yeshiva, and some people need to daven this way.
So we need to learn to separate.
I'm not here to ask on other people. Everybody has their...
And everybody, including the person who needs to have Yom Kippur and yeshiva dafka, he needs to this year, you need to open up a Shulchan Aruch and look at the simanim about eating and not about the simanim about davening. The simanim about piguach nefesh, and say to yourself, we have to learn to separate when we turn on the emotional. That's unthinkable not to be in yeshiva, and I'll make tremendous mesiras nefesh. When the mesiras nefesh is not literal, that's 100% right. When the mesiras nefesh is literal and it's somebody else's nefesh to boot, then we need to learn how to separate.
And I don't want to be a nudnik and belabor the point. Just a little more.
By the way, are you Chassidish? Are you coming with an angle, or you're?
I'm always coming with an angle, and not just one. Usually more than one. I'm kind of there. If you go into from communities, and it's really anywhere, I wouldn't say that mask wearing is at 100%. It's not maybe like it is in other communities. I don't know if it's like that in secular communities. A lot of people, if you speak to them, they'll say, yeah, but we saw the rallies, we saw the protests in the street. We see that in secular America, they don't really care. Skates are not done so much. Yeah. And this is a thing that they're doing, more or less. But what about the gullus aspect? What about the fact that we're still guests in somebody else's land? And out of respect for them, they're looking at us. Why wouldn't there be an Indian and just being upkeep in public?
Well, let me sorry.
Them.
To what you're saying, on Pesach, I try to be very, very zohar and chametz and that. I walk out, all the restaurants are open, eating bread and this and that. Does it bother me? I know this aser, and I don't. So if I think that wearing a mask is important, the fact that the people on the street don't do, they also eat chametz on Pesach. So why don't we transfer what we believe to be right? So if somebody feels a mask can do something, whether it'll save the whole world or it'll save 1 out of 1,000. But if we feel that way, unless a person feels it doesn't save anybody, fine. I'm not. But I'm saying if we do, what do I kid other people in Zalzal? Since when did that become a thing for us? I mean, there's not a thing we do that the world doesn't do. The answer is we go with our own shahar. So why is this? Why, because they're doing it, does that become different to us?
Let me address that a moment. In other words, it happens like this. I think that the yeshiva-lites, for example, are critical thinkers. They think things through. So the second they see this clear discrepancy, there's a real hypocrisy going on over here, their reaction is that at this point it's a bunch of it's lies. It's all lies. It's political. It's driven by politics. So that's the case. I could do what I want to do. In other words, now I address what you're saying. You can't do what you want to do. It's not true. You can't do what you do. You maybe you're 100% right. It's politically driven. There's a certain element of undercurrent of anti-Semitism. Call it what you want, but the bottom line is you can't do what you want to do. It's not hefker. You are a Yidden Golos.
So even though if it's driven by anti-Semitism, don't we have to push back and not go like sheep to the slaughter?
So in other words, that becomes a more direct question of how does one address anti-Semitism. That is true. But does that mean you made a statement, I will now fight anti-Semitism by walking around without a mask? What have you done? You've done nothing besides looking at the optics of it. a terrible travesty. Chil Hashem, the average person out there doesn't understand what you're doing and push back. There are ways of pushing back to the anti-Semitism. That's Chazal's eitzes that we speak about during Tefillah Milchama, which is a Bezunder Shailu. But as far as making a statement by not wearing a mask, you want to show the fact that it's all anti-Semitic and they're all hypocritical. There's nothing gained by that. There's nothing at all gained by that. Again, a critical thinker understands that this is totally, the hypocrisy is blatant. It's not a shayla. So now what do you do about it? You know, you're living in a world where that is the way, that's the name of the game. That's what it looks like. Having said that, you can't prove anything by reacting publicly to that hypocrisy. What's the point?
1 second. So how does it, like a good Yisrael, but not only a good Yisrael, we were always trained that we lay low in Gullus, but we see real organizations led by Gedei Torah making lawsuits, suing the government.
So very good.
So
that takes us, when the proper Shtadlonim and Gedolei Yisrael understand that there's a need called pushing back, indeed that's called Milchama. We'll include it in the gather from Milchama. If it's during Tefillah Milchama, this is something called, political activism is a form of Milchama, which the proper Gisha is done. We know that's what we do. I, as a Yachid, cannot make the statement that I want to blatantly show I will not be nispal from the fact you're attacking me. Basap is. My grandfather's his Messiah was no talis in the streets. What's the statement you're trying to make? There is no statement you can make as a Yachid. Klal Yisrael, if it's effective and can be done, and you're addressing an akuda, so although you're in Golos, indeed there's a gather called Milchama. Political activism is a form of Milchama.
But it's not given over to try in your own home.
But me, as a Yachid, Me'echetei, it gives me the license to fear that Milchama. It's a collective Godel Yisrael decision as opposed to me as a Yachid.
I guess, again, segueing about this issue about fighting, I'd like to give a mashal and say, a person is walking down the street and there's a bully that lives nearby and the bully attacks him. So there are two forces dictating possibly what do I do. One is a gut emotional pushback. I'm going to punch him back. Or a seichel understanding of what do I want, how do I get to it, and what's most effective. The worst thing that you can do is react with that emotion. One of the reasons al Pider Hateva why the Israeli army is effective is because they're not run by emotions. It's very cold and calculating. Many times the Arab armies were run on hyped up emotions, and that's where you make your worst mistakes. If you decide to attack the bully and there's no chance of you winning and you get clobbered, so is that what you wanted? So there are some people that they'd rather lay in the hospital for 6 months and just feel good that they kicked back, and then what'll be after 6 months is not clear. If somebody with seichel says, he's a type of bully that if you hit him once, he'll go away, then that's the right thing to do. The problem is what you're talking about, the mob type reaction. He's not wearing mask. I'm not going to wear mask. He's a Sunni Israel. I'm going to do this. That's not a tactic. That's a very, very low grade emotional response that doesn't show much about yourself and not much about your seichel. The type of things that Godes Israel does is sits down and weighs what are our goals. What do we prioritize? How do we get to it legally in ways that don't run afoul of the law? And
it's a seichel-based reaction.
Yes, and what will be the price? Everything is a trade-off. You get only so many points in a political game. What are we saving?
It's not the protest. It's not a street uprising.
It's not at all.
It's not the Haredi Spring.
A street uprising is the lowest common denominator of reaction, and it's something that brings the worst results. So just comparing the two, Godes reactions are reactions thought through, and they're done civilly, and they're done through the due process of law, and takes into account what do we gain, what do we lose.
My final question on this topic, then we'll go back to Yiddishkeit. People said all the Yidden after the Lager, the Kleisberg Rebbe, and others came out of the camps, and they said they couldn't believe that after all that Mashiach isn't here. It didn't. Most people of our generation have never seen the world just economic collapse, government collapse, entertainment. Every industry has been turned everything upside down. Whatever it meant Tzipis Yeshua a year ago, and being waiting. Did our perspective vis-a-vis Ikvus of the Mashiach and waiting for Mashiach change in iota since 12 months ago because of what we just saw? Is it Mechayev more? I'm not asking the Rosh Yeshiva to predict and like the little Mekubalim, but Ben Torah's thinking. Okay, this is it. Mashiach's coming. Look what just happened. You see it.
So let me tell you my reaction to this. I've had this question many a times, and again I'll refer to Baron, so beautifully written about what we're talking about in the Tzipiyah Yeshua. But let me tell you as follows. I tell people, Chazal say, from the Gimel Dvarim Shaboim Behesach Hadas, one of them is Mashiach. If you're so taken and so busy with the fact that this sim and that sim and the other, where's the Hesach Hadas? Pshat and Hesach Hadas means as follows. All the things are there, the overarching thing, there's no question that the Mashiach, things are abnormal. Like you said, everything's imploded, there's no question. Hesach Hadas means remove your das from thinking about the Mashiach part of it and change your way of life. The focus becomes everything besides thinking about Siman Acher v'Siman Oisef. But that's the difference.
But what am I telling my children? I'm putting them to sleep at night. They're like, what just happened to the whole world? Because the Mashiach, the Ben Shama has a plan for the Bria, we're coming to the end. Is that a thing to be telling children?
You can tell the children that, and because of that, at this point we're supposed to, the next point is, focus on your tikkun, learn better, steig better, focus on that, focus on your tefillah, focus on your limud, change your dikdek mitzvahs. That's the outcome. The outcome is not, let's be excited and look at the simanim and find where the other simanim shtim with this chazal to that chazal and the other chazal, and how it's going to help me personally. Baron said so beautifully. So
And the gematria also.
Yeah, the gematria is for sure. There's always a gematria. Kadosh Baruch Hu gave us an endless supply of gematrias, limited amount, Baruch Hashem. But the focus, the shift has to be behesach hadas, not because you're silly and you ignore the simanim. Chazal give us simanim, Seif Masech T'Saita. But you understand that those simanim are supposed to prompt you to focus on different things. That's the hesach hadas of Mashiach. That nikud you can clearly tell. Rabbi Sai, kids, it's special times now. At this time, we have to do so much more to be medactic in the things we're supposed to be doing. And think about tzaddik be'amunah yichya means the amunah, the fact that behind, in the back, in the rest of his mind, there's an amunah. About it's there. But bismanenu, because it's all there, do the things you're supposed to be doing. That's the focus.
I'd like to go back to something a little more basic in this vein. There's a story from the Brisker Rav, and again, a Brisker Meiser should be told over with every little detail. Shalom remembers these things really well, but I hope I have pretty much the story down. Brisker Rav, when he got married, got a nadin of a block of buildings in Warsaw. That was prime real estate. Warsaw was the Manhattan of 100 years ago. Something happened. I don't remember if it was cheated out or something happened, and basically lost it. And he said the following remark at some point. Memeint, I'll translate the Yiddish, but the memeint as mnuchas hanefesh is binyanim in Varsha. You think that mnuchas hanefesh is having buildings in Warsaw. Mnuchas hanefesh is a kapitel shar bitochen in Chayvus Lavavus. Mnuchas hanefesh is shar bitochen Chayvus Lavavus. I think there's a much more fundamental lesson we should take out and teach our kids, and that is the concept of bitochen, meaning not bitochen when things are hard to come through, but no matter how much we think that something feels to us as if we have it all, we don't. Somebody was speaking to me who has a lot of nechasim in places that people were envious of. And he told me recently about what it looks like now in terms of income and the mortgages and stuff like that, and it's frightening. The idea that something nobody could have thought that the airline industry would be flying 3 passengers over a month. I just came in by train, and in my car there were 2 people, 3 people, that's what it looked like. I walked in Manhattan. I grew up in Manhattan. It was frightening. It was a ghost town. So I think lessons in bitochen and what is real and what's lasting, I think those are more fundamental lessons. Before we get to Mashiach, shar bitochen in Chayvus Lavavus should take precedence, I think.
Rosh Yeshiva questions. Baruch Hashem, over the past 2 years, there have been a proliferation of yeshivas designed for the boy who needs something different to keep him connected to Yiddishkeit and growing. They're certainly in need, and Baruch Hashem that they're there. However, this has now had an effect on boys who could otherwise be matzliach in a mainstream yeshiva. Well, they're okay with the davening and the starim. They don't mind. They like being yeshiva light b'nei Torah. They also want to go on ski trips and have kumzatzes and shabbatons and more sports and shorter starim. How should parents, mechanchim and yeshiva, deal with boys who are on the fence and they wouldn't mind a bit more activity, but they can make it in a mainstream yeshiva? Start with Stolos from Yeshiva.
So I definitely, I think it was a critical need to have yeshivas that have more of a spread. I would like to think that we could have a much greater continuum of yeshivas. There are so many yeshivas, Baruch Hashem, and other than which Masechta they're learning, it's hard to see the differences. But there are many more different types of people. Some boys they like Musar more. Some boys like Chassidish Knech. Some boys are kumzit. Some boys a little more time for sports. There should be a continuum. We shouldn't have to say, okay, do we want the Bacher in Brisk or in remedial yeshiva? I mean, there should be something in between a yeshiva that is geared for Bachrim that at a young age are already, fully in it and can handle it and do extremely well, to Bachrim that need still time, space. I think it's also something that parents need to make more honest cheshbon nefesh. A parent who really would like his son to be very matzliach. And unfortunately, I know parents like this, where they think that the way the kid will be matzliach is by pushing very hard. And it's not productive. Usually, a boy's rebbe will usually have a good feel on it. He'll have more of an objective feel than a parent has. It's wonderful that parents have the goal that they want to be Gadol B'Yisrael, and they have an image of a Gadol B'Yisrael, but they don't always have a realistic image of what their kid is like. And there are many Gadol Yisrael who in younger years took a bit to catch up, and that's their nature.
So the Shiva saying, Bepel, go easy? And
I'd say the attitude should change, and there should be a more realistic evaluation of what a boy needs, and there should be different. I shouldn't be forced to between a yeshiva that has all learning and nothing else.
She was saying the same yeshiva should figure out a way to accommodate a boy who needs.
Many more. There should be a natural rebuy of meisters that have different flavors to it, because that's how many people there are, right now we're focused on the two ktsavis. Either yeshiva that's trying to they look at Reb Chaim Kanievsky's daily schedule and they sort of more or less try to keep that, or something that's taken from a place that's remedial to the extreme. There should be room in different ages and different times. There's nothing wrong in a place where younger Bachrim have one type of schedule, and as you get older, you have a more rigorous schedule. I would like to think that there should be a greater variety of yeshivas that mix a little bit. Some Bachrim get very little out of a kumzitz, some Bachrim get their chiyus out of it, and some Bachrim need a little bit of it. There should be more expression of different bits and pieces, and b'meila more people will find a place that fits them. A shoe, if it's too loose or too tight, the tzad hashav is it's not good. So sometimes you make a mistake, but the idea that the tighter the shoe, the better the foot is going to be, doesn't hold itself out, and just a loose shoe doesn't do much for a person either. There should be enough sizes, widths and lengths, to be able to find a place for different people with different needs, especially boys at different ages have different needs.
There's no question that the yeshiva, the tachlis of yeshiva is to develop a full human being. That's the tachlis of the yeshiva, not simply make the lamdan. That's pashut. And because of that, human beings are varied. As Aaron said so beautifully, you're talking about so many types of people, especially the world we live in today, it's so varied, not shayless. So the yeshiva has to cater to that. And the first thing, as a parent has to understand that the child is not his nachas machine. It's so important. We generally, as parents, look at our kids and say, you're going to give me nachas. And because the world at large, which is dictated by what's called the facade, externality, That's mechayev. Oh, this guy made it. He's big. He's choshev. He got to the best yeshiva. So because you're my nachas machine, I have to push you to get to the best yeshiva. And unfortunately, to the point of the cost of the child. The child has to be understood individually as that, and the person's koiches, the child's koiches, has to be developed to the nth degree. Every yeshiva has to fit the child. As so beautiful stated, talking the size of the shoe, it has to fit. If it doesn't fit, it's a churban. Hein letav, hein lemutav, there's no question. Yes, indeed, the bochum on the fence, as you describe, a bochum that they look to the other side, and they're having a great time. What are you? Who are you? Let's define you as a bocher. That has to be studied.
So give me a figure personal a minute. The yeshivas are yeshiva, one of the most prestigious yeshivas in the world. There are probably bachim in Philadelphia who would enjoy your comes. I assume it's not part of the formal schedule on a regular basis. That they give. Okay, but what about that bachim in Philadelphia who could use it? It would be nice for him.
As funny as it sounds, I guess a moment of candor. I know that's as big view to many, but we've had such bachim yeshiva, and I made it a point to come to my house with a couple other bachim and have that song to sing together. Push it the times that they had him come because I knew he needed it, the bacher needed it. He sat there with 5 other bacher. We sat in Fabrenk for an hour and a half, for 2 hours, in singing together.
So the answer is like the Silver Spring
exactly
that they have Rabbeim,
but because
or tuned enough to know what the bacher needs.
What the bacher needs, but our focus is not how good you are in the shtickle taisvis. Our focus is who you are as a mensch. And every child, every person is different. Obviously, Kashem Shei, they're not the same thing. We're trying our best to get the bacher to be the best he's supposed to be. And he needed that kumzis, and another bacher doesn't speak to it at all, obviously. It means each bacher has to have what he has to have, and that's the focus of the yeshiva. So the yeshivas are doing their thing. They're not just giving these kids a good time. They're trying to take the bacher. You could find yourself. You could figure out exactly who you are. Okay, the yeshivas, as we know, the yeshivas are, because it's a system by nature, it doesn't speak to all the same. It cuts, it shortens, it makes long, that's what it does. As long as it's not a stone battle, obviously, we're talking about the yeshivas doing what it's supposed to be doing. But the point is, the varied yeshivas would be fantastic, because the yeshiva speaks to different types of boys, and we have to be honest, as mechanchim and as parents, to understand what this particular boy needs. Once you have that, the yeshivas can indeed service the child.
Now, Mike, let me interrupt you. I want to have a Maisa Rav. And it's something that Adam Gadol, one word of an Adam Gadol. When the first year, second year, I was in Silver Spring, I would go back frequently to Shul. My Shpach was still there, and there was a group of boys from the senior class, in the middle of winter, visiting Eretz Yisrael, and they looking for the yeshivas. They would go to the next year. By us, all the boys go to Eretz Yisrael. Just almost every bach goes to Eretz Yisrael. Afterwards, to learn for years. And they were looking. I was in Eretz also then, and I told them, I'll take you around a little bit for a day. So then I went different places, and I took him into Rebbe Yashiv. He was still available, and you could, I took them in, 4 boys, and the Gabbai told Rebbe Yashiv, these are 4 American Bachim, very fine American Bachim, looking for yeshivas. They want a bracha from the Rav. They should get into the best yeshivas. So Rabbi Yashiv nodded soberly, and he said, in Mirz Hashem, they should get into the most suitable yeshivas. He changed the word best to suitable. I don't know if you knew Rabbi Yashiv. Yashiv was on a hair. He was like, I want to say Berchosin Eskaima. They went to 4 different yeshivas. Each one turned out a gem, and he. But there was. It was a hesach hadas of an Adam Gadol the way he said it. That the best means nothing, suitable means everything, and just I don't know if this story ever made it in. This story is to me is the dmus of a person with a very crystal clear das Torah.
Beautiful. I just want to follow up on something. This is going to sound counterintuitive because in the Welt, people who aren't really following closely think that the girls have it much easier than the boys. The girls, their high schools, one big kumsitz and GOs, and the boys are the ones who have to learn. It's really not so pasha that it's like that, because at the end of the day, the gauge of success for boys, he goes through a system, and there's always going to be a yeshiva that's going to take him next. Wherever he goes, he's going to go from A to B, and in Eretz Yisrael as well, he's going to end up in a yeshiva that's suitable for him. The girls have a big problem, because there's only academics. That's the only barometer. Most of them, or many of them, are not academically inclined. They're tzniistike, erliche, mispalaleis. They're beautiful girls. They're wonderful. They're not academic. That's not their thing, hysteria and Girish Svarad. It just doesn't do it for them. And they're only going to get into seminary if their marks are good. That's just the Metzias. So the end game is almost out of reach for a lot of them because they're not academically inclined. There's no yeshivas like seminaries for the girls who are not academic inclined, really. There's not that many options of it for whatever reasons. It just may be because the motivations are different when people open girls' schools and seminaries than when they open yeshivas. I can't say this as a generalization, but a lot of times the women's teachers aren't. It's not the same as a rebbe because they're wives and mothers. They're not able to give what a rebbe is able to give in the yeshiva and sit down on Thursday night till 2:00 in the morning and to open. That they have shibudim. So the girls are getting the short end of the stick, and the whole academic thing is breaking it for them. So what is our system doing to them? If there's superficiality about the boys who have options, imagine what it does to the girls who only have academics to go on and they're not academic.
I'm less than familiar with the world of seminaries. My daughters grew up basically in Israel, so I'm not familiar with it. But Silver Spring, we have the girls' high school, and Mikufi, it does seem they go to a variety of seminaries, different types, different experiences, and B'derech Klal do very well. I don't get that feedback that all seminaries are all based on academics. I do feel that they have quite a variety. I know Rabbi Katz.
Should academics be a variable by a girl at all?
It's one of the tools. For some people, a non-serious learning atmosphere makes everything not serious. Some girls do better when they have academics. It should always be with the goal of what fits the person. I know our Menal, Rabbi Katz, who's an extremely astute and dedicated Menal, a big part of his effort is to find the right seminaries, and it has to do a lot with the personality of the girl. I believe, from what I see and understand, that the elements there. I do believe there are many nuances. There are some that are more into the experience, some are more into an emotional connection. That's the feedback. I must admit, I'm removed from it. My children never went through a system here. And I'm not heavily involved in the girls' school.
I get deal with this nekuda because my wife, being a mechaneches in the girls' high school, actually in Philadelphia, does deal with the girls, and it's always very specific. She's not an academic. There's one word for her. She needs the warmth of this small. I said there are indeed the numbers don't sound so many. That you're right about them. So, but at the same time, it sounds that they're clearly different flavors of the.
Should academics be a factor when weighing
for those?
About
There's very serious. There's no question. It's a nekuda. There are those.
No, I'm saying is that something that schools. Does academics mean anything by a girl?
You see, you're dealing with something which is a broader picture, which is the world at large. There's no question the world at large is such that, because the push for equality, call it what you want, but Lamaisa, the average girl does feel to a degree that you cannot look aside to the academics. It means something. There's a certain amount of, quote, learning, unquote, that has to be done for the girl to feel she has accomplished something. Even the weaker girls that have no interest in that. Girls have all kinds of talents, all kinds of things. Again, I can speak from personal experience from grandchildren of mine that are brilliant, actually, but not academically inclined to sit through a classroom, but very creative and very, very good. They found each one their personal niche to find exactly where they could thrive and bring themselves out. But there are girls that need an academic. You're saying, as a rule, as the Moisei becomes based or very much caters only to academics, it's probably not going to work for the girls, but you have a very serious element of girls, a smaller percentage probably, that will indeed thrive in the academics. But of course, it's a larger picture than that. And as I said before, each one needs what she particularly needs. That's where she's supposed to go, obviously.
There's also, just let me refer back a second, there is an element about academics important because it lends itself to responsibility, to accountability. Chesed has no way to measure it. I mean, the Shemayim, after 120. But here, so if we have, let's say we have a school that's teaching boys or girls, and we emphasize Chesed a lot. That's great. And yes, in character, it does a lot. But it's important that there be a test, an accountability, a sense of some starch in that fabric. So I definitely think academics is important, even for boys or girls, that's not going to be their gateway to Yiddishkeit. How much, kifi, it's part of the balance.
I have to ask a question. I don't know if it's the most comfortable question. Somebody sent it in last year already, and we didn't get to it because of time constraints. The person wrote to me, this woman wrote to me after the convention last year. I don't know how you make a decision which questions to use, but you should know that I'm not Meichel because I have no one to ask this question to. I can't ask it. So if you don't ask it, you're cheating me out of a chance for Das Torah. I'm going to read it because threats work. I grew up, she writes, in the name of a Hasidus, it's irrelevant, community, and very, very recognized and respected Hasidus. I grew up in the blank community, as did my husband. It was just too hard and restrictive, and us and many of our friends left that community, but we're eager to stay connected to Yiddishkeit, to halacha, all of it, not baseline. We want to be Yidden. We send our kids to Chadarim, the girls go to girls' school. Some people call us tuna bagels. This is what she writes. I didn't make up this question. And we have a large community, just like us, people who live in a neighborhood, we're all the same. I see in the years since I moved here, this person obviously thought that they're going to cap it. We can't do this, but we could do this. But she says, because it's a community built on people who left, we've gotten more and more lax. The shaitels get longer, tznius gets less, more technology and more secular culture. I feel like we threw out the baby with the bathwater. Is there a solution for me, one woman alone, to remind and encourage people who are genuinely good to find their footing and save themselves? There's a lot here, on a lot of levels.
Let me start with an interesting story. I had a story once, many years ago. There was a family, irreligious parents came with a daughter of Balas Tshuva that came, and she was very convinced about what she was doing was right, and she was at odds with her parents. That happens often enough. Came to my father. My father wanted me to be the B'shas Ma'aseh. We had a discussion about she was very sure what she's doing is right and everything else. And she was being very, very obstinate, not being mekabel our opinion. So I said, I want to tell you something. Please forgive me. It's amazing. What you've done is amazing. You've changed your life. You've made decisions on it. You've changed your life. And that change of life has given you not only the fact you've come to truth, but now you have the license to make decisions based on what you think are right decisions. One of the most difficult things Bali Tshuva have, and I've noticed this time and again, is the concept of Seilach Harav. Direction from someone, a leader, someone tells you what to do. Because they've made decisions, and good decisions, have come to good conclusions, they begin to trust the decision-making process. The idea of someone else telling them exactly what to do is difficult for them to be mekabel. I can't say it's across the board, but I've seen this from time to time.
Because they fought hard.
They fought hard, and they made decisions, wonderful decisions, and a murdik and a kudah. And I explained to her, there's something called a seilach harav in Yiddishkeit. Part of your being a Baal Tshuva, has to be to accept the fact that there's someone who may be smarter, who sees the trees from the forest, and can indeed help you, although you're great with your decision-making process, but at times you need to understand things a little differently. Now, that's from that end of the spectrum. Let me tell you something. Whatever group of these people are coming from, a person coming from the group of sect of Hasidim, at that point there was a person who was the decision maker. Now, as you said, the question seems to point that it was too much for them, but they understood the first epiphanous moment for every people of these organizations, these groups of Chassidim, is to find that there are people out there that really observe a Yiddishkeit which is really vibrant and true and ausgehalten, Shulchan Aruch, and ganz ausgehalten. Besides, till that point, they looked at them, everyone besides our sect, says an Agoyim. The fact that they look different says an Agoyim. At this point, I've been introduced to the fact that Zanishkin Goyim. I've had personally experience with people such as these that have indeed spoken to me about their introduction to a Litv Shayid as a Baal Shulchan Aruch, as a Yiddish Mensch, as ausgehalten. It's an amazing thing, an epiphanous moment at times. But here, interestingly enough, it's the exact opposite of this Balas Tshuva. She walked away from the place that she felt that she had a mentorship, she had a Rebbe that held her alive. She didn't like the constriction, didn't like the strictures of what that society was mechayiv, but the fact that she broke away from that indicated a decision that she now looks askance. She pushed away the fact there's a mentorship in her life. From the flip side of it, she came from total mentorship to no mentorship at all, made the decision on her own. Rahman al-Tzan, she goes moorings. She no longer has the idea of the fact that even amongst us, there's something called a mentor, a leader, someone who looks at you and tells you, no, it's not the way you're supposed to be doing things. Rabbi Yisrael Salanter supposedly said, as Beidov Matois, the Chassidische mit der Litwische, the Shemena mit After Shalom ke Rebbe, and the Chassidische mit the Rebbe is alles. In other words, there's two extremes here. You have something called a mentorship. A person that you're describing here, the first thing she needs to do is find somebody she trusts, an ehrliche Yid, and turn to that individual and say, help me, guide me. Ich werde nicht kein Chassid. I'm not going back to my Chassidische roots with the fact that I take direction from somebody out there that can give me my moorings, show me where I'm supposed to be, show me what I'm supposed to do. It's inevitable. A person breaks away from something, and there's an undercurrent here as well. She broke away from that because she had obviously the undercurrent of the ability to break away. I'm not going to call it a merida. She sounds like she really wanted to go away from this. It was too much for her. She wants to be an ehrlich from a yid. But there was an element here of breaking away from something else. That Nakuda at times can be an undercurrent where I come to this, okay, I'm used to this now, let's see if I can break away from this as well. She doesn't want that. She wants to be able to come to a point where she's comfortable with who she is and her Yiddishkeit. What she needs at that point is a direct mentor. Someone who could tell her and show her these things, this is a line crossed, this should not be done. I understand you're not meshabed yourself to a certain sect of Chassidim or Rebbe, whatever it should be. You want to be an Erlich Torah Yid. You want to be meshabed yourself to Torah Kedosha. You need direction. So don't reject the concept of being a Chassid. Reject the concept of being someone who's stuck in a system.
Find the Rav who accepts your starting point as right where you are now and work with that person.
That's exactly right.
I would like to continue that line. Nobody can be an Erlich Yid based on what you can't do. You can't, you oughtn't, you shouldn't, doesn't do it for anybody. What a person needs is what yes. So somebody learned in the yeshiva, L'mashal, was turned on. So he remembers sitting a whole Thursday night trying to say a teretz on a k'tzais, trying to answer Kiveg Zakasha. There's a certain regish to kedusha that accompanies him, and he may have drifted, he may not have drifted, but that's it. Somebody might have been into the davening in the yeshiva, the seriousness, and so on and so forth. This person, again, sounds that they never had those feelings of connection in the chassidus that they grew up in. Now, which means that it's all going to be about what not. I don't think that has staying power. I think what needs to develop, and there are people who are Chassidish Rebbes, even if they're Litvische, they have a personality and an ability to create an environment that people feel the positive side. There was a certain community, and again, both very chashuv people, I'm not like to mention names, where a geographic area that has two extremely drawing figures. One has a very, very Chassidish kneish himself. He grew up Litvish. He's no Rebbe Sheyichas, and certainly not until the Baal Shem Tov, maybe before, but no Chassidish Sheyichas from the Baal Shem Tov. But he's a person with a very Chassidish kneish and has drawn many people in who found fire and warmth Yiddishkeit. Not far from him, a few blocks away, is somebody who has a very serious, earnest, halachic perspective with a certain aura of Sizo, and he's drawn many people to it. The Tzad HaShava is that they both have a way of projecting an environment that you feel you're part of something of Kedusha. I think that that's the key. So if someone's speaking about somebody who can tell you clear yes or no, but more important is finding people, and I think this is something that is really waiting for. Even Chassidus, the irony of it is, when there's a Rebbe with a few hundred Chassidim, they can come around the room for a tish, they can feel connected, they can talk to him occasionally, and if it's the right derech for them, they feel it. When a Rebbe has 50,000 Chassidim, then basically it means nothing. So I think finding a community where you have a personality that you can connect to, and he has created an environment like that, I think it's vital for this woman. I think it's vital for many people.
We have kashrus organizations watching out what we eat, and filtering companies who watch our internet, and all these, like this one, Shadlanis organizations, Aguda and others like them, watching out for us in government, and chinuch organizations. Why isn't anybody watching out for us when it comes to tzedakah? There are organizations that are no longer viable. There are causes that never were. Yet our mailboxes, telephones, and newspapers are inundated with charity requests, and no one seems to care that millions of dollars, tzedakah dollars, are going down a big black hole of scam artists. This is the questioner's assessment and premise, not mine. Why aren't we spend so much money on tzedakah? Why aren't we investing a little bit in creating some kind of certification or oversight to organization or body?
Well, first of all, there's no money in it, so that's the first problem. But more seriously, the Rav Zechron Avracha of our community, and the person, the Rashiva who established the yeshiva in Yeshiva Greater Washington, Rav Einim Zechron Avracha, somebody once came to him and said, "Why don't they do this and why don't they do this?" And he kept interjecting, "Who's the they? Who's the they? Who's the they?" And the person didn't pick up on it, and they should do this, they should do that. Finally, Rav Einim Zechron Avracha told him, when we become they will do what we know is the right thing. I've actually, I guess I feel like Don Quixote. I actually tried, wherever I meet somebody that I know and I feel he's in a position to do something, I tried to push this idea numerous times. I've spoken to people who are involved in huge national organizations, Gvirim, who've been burned terribly, and things like that.
The yeshiva is being masking to the question. There's a real problem.
It's a real issue. Now, it's part of the issue of our becoming a big klal. 70 years ago, 80 years ago, everybody knew everybody else. And it was possible one person knew exactly what's going on every place. That's long gone. Today, it's Blean Hora, Yosef Hashem Aleichem, Kachem, and it's wonderful. But we have no chinuch in professional, in organized and professional. What needs, I believe, and again, this is what I feel strongly about, something like a guide star, a website, an organization that is funded independently, obviously. You don't want them to be funded by the tzedakahs they're overseeing. You want it to be run by professional accountants, auditors.
I have a serious question. Is that a Yiddish Zach? That means the rabbis who we talk about and the Gedolim who gave tzedakah, did they do that? Is that a Yiddish Zach to check in so much?
Well, let me explain something to you. You have $1,000 to give somebody. So if you know it intimately, you know exactly who you give it to. It's not you have infinite amount of money. And the problem is not just that this person is getting money he shouldn't get. The problem is people who need the money are not getting it. And I can tell you, again, unfortunately, I know too many stories, and I become very cynical. People who really needed money, as people went to quote-unquote raise money for them, and they gave, not only didn't they give money, they didn't even give Maisa money to the person they needed to. Maybe Truma Bizman Azeh, maybe that's what the person got. Unfortunately, so you need to have a professional group. You need that they should be, yekis with no sense of humor, humorless yekis, nothing like that for running.
All yekis.
What?
Any yekka, basically.
I got to welcome everybody. So, but what I mean is professional people are not dependent on it, and they need, all they need to do is ascertain basic facts. In other words, there would be a website, and if you want to be part of it, you register, and the demands are, again, professional wake-up criteria. Somebody checks how many people are you serving, what percentage, when was the last time you audited, what percentage goes to administrative costs, what percent for you're saying, and does a place exist or not? I've known people who
keep updating it year after year, because things are...
or else you could say, it was last updated in 1970. Decide what you want to... I don't think we should tell people what to do, but have the information. I mean, I get hundreds of envelopes like everyone else does. I used to put... my means are not great, so I used to put a few dollars each one for Rosh Hashanah, whatever it is. Until 2, 3, 4 places were shams, I stopped. I only give to something or somebody I know well, that I know. I'd stop, so it goes straight into the garbage can. So you want to have that group, and you want to have, what you do want to have is, you want to have Rabbanim not in a position where they're doing this work. It's professional work that should be paid for, overseen by professional people. Rabbanim should give halachic guidelines, and they should be willing to take. What will happen is, and let me give you a scenario that I'm sure everyone can imagine. Somebody will call the person, the accountant running this, at 3 in the morning and say, there's emergency now, you have to put it up. The guy will say, we have rules and regulations, you're right, seach, a reidif, a meiser, there's a whole vocabulary, and then you get 6 phone calls and 2 people putting bombs by your doorstep. You need to have people that will stand up and say, this is G'darim. And again, it requires, what do you do with the person that 3 in the morning, they need to fly into America, you need money? But if it will, what'll happen is, what's happening is people give less and less to these causes. I mean, you get jaded. Another one. I personally know a bunch of them that are farces. We can't publicize those because it's Lashon Hara. It's because of this and that. And what happens, people become very cynical, they stop giving. And the cynicism also destroys, so Rabbanim don't know what they're doing. It's the same, cynicism becomes very pervasive. And this is an area where people know tzedakahs that don't exist, people that don't exist.
Got it.
And it has a ripple effect. I think you're throwing down a gauntlet that a group of people, and I would suggest it should be spearheaded by donors who give lots of money and give really wholeheartedly to create an organization funded independently and structured in a way that's menschlich, respectable, but doesn't allow itself to be manipulated.
I actually know someone who tried to make exactly that kind of website.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he started such a website, a fellow in Santa about Tshuva, that he got exactly this. He spoke to me about the fact he gets envelopes and he knows envelopes with the whole Tmimus over there. He would write a $5 check in each one of them, and it was getting out of hand because the more you send, obviously, the more you get.
Yes.
That's what's happening. He started getting like piles and piles of reams of envelopes. So he finally came to me, spoke to me about it. He gave me a whole envelope. So I was able to see immediately that half of them were Pashat, like some of the same address with different names. He talked about a lot of these things. So he was at that point trying to develop a website where you would have Rabbanim knows some signatures he recognized from the Haredi community. My father was some letters, this and that. So he knew that these were more, ostensibly more ehrlich. I think about him, wissen that who takes whose signature where. But he tried it. He didn't get far because he needed, like you say, the infrastructure of Rabbanim. The plan is a fantastic plan. If we could get this ball rolling out of this session just for this alone, is
This is a big zach, so we're addressing to the viewers.
So there's no question.
You'll be adding tens of millions of dollars to genuine stockers.
To real stock.
And if the cynicism goes away, then people will want to give more. Everybody
they know they're
sure.
giving something which counts. It's real money. Chazal speak about the churban of having a person give stocker to the wrong address.
I know from personal experience. Sometimes people will call me without saying names, of course, but they need a writer. Why do they need a writer? Because if that guy is being chased by the mafia for stocker money, and this person he had such a stray for later that he's sleeping in the subway station, I better come up with a story for my he's a real nitzrach. But I have no drama in my story. There's no mafia and there's no fire. Could you help me find a way to write over regular people who need money? Why do they need money? Because they can't pay tuition. Because they didn't get their bonus. But there's no drama in it, so it creates a untenable situation for them. So they're also resorting to baloney. So Shiva is saying, let's do it. To the one who's watching this and feels they're they.
It needs, and I'm telling you, the people who should spare it are the people that they
give serious
real
money.
Time and they start and do it professionally. And again, you have to think beforehand how it could be run well professionally in a way that respects the needs, and they're loyal in many nitzrach. I mean, you need to figure it out, but it would add tens of millions of dollars to genuine stockers
and bring back the heart, because it would be real.
It would bring back a faith that we know that things are real in our world.
Since the Siyam Hashas, there's been an explosion in Limud HaTorah. The Afyami are similar programs. So many. There's Araisa and there's Zichru and there's so many and there's Daf HaShavua, and they're all very well marketed. So this is obviously laudable. A rebellion in Torah is beautiful. But along with the Kriyas learning, some have pointed out that it's become a bit commercialized to the point where it is being branded and marketed like the latest must-have iPhone. Should it be of concern that we might be losing the inherent Kedushas HaTorah, or does the end result justify the means?
I figure that's a strong statement. The end result justifying the means. But as far as having this peeve of the fact that it's sold like Madison Avenue, it doesn't bother me that much. You're talking about the manuvel. But you pull them to the Beis Medrash. The manuvel could be Madison Avenue as well. But the Beis Medrash is the place that, if it's Hashem, it does the job. A certain amount of Torah itself, if the person unfortunately responds only to the market, that gets into the Giblat Gemara, so be it. There has to be done with Seichel Al-Kapana. The things that are so tasteless of putting together narishkeit and the things that attack things that shouldn't come into a Jewish home to try to sell. That is true. But if things are marketed in a certain way, because again, unfortunately, the world we live in today is that world of Yafta Lakim the Yefes. It's a very, very external world. It's a world that, unfortunately, the glitz, the pomp and glory is what meets our eye. So that is as a means to get us to the Beis Medrash would be a wonderful thing. I don't think there's a peeve, although it has to be done tastefully. That's dangerous to Torah Chalila. The inherent Kedusha of Torah, I don't think becomes minimized because the person's daf yomi, because he was so taken by the glitz, by the pump. It doesn't change once he gets to learning. What drove him to this may have been something which was Madison Avenue type. That's true, but once he's in Torah, the Torah does it. I'm not so cynical about the fact that the means are not there to justify such ends.
I, I had a Rebbe of Tendel Zechayner Vracha, Yitzchak Tendel Zechayner Vracha. He's the father of Moshe, Yosef Zechayner Vracha, Brother Chaim Shalom, and he took around Rebbe Bochber in America when he came to raise money. He had a lot of interesting stories about it, and one of them was they made an appeal in the shul, and whoever made the appeal started waxing very, very eloquent about what kind of gewaltige goyen Rebbe Bochber is, and the whole the American, even in the 30s, America had a knetch that Europe didn't have, and Rebbe Bochber ran up to the beam, he gave a clap, and he said, "Sheker v'chazov s'nish emes." So whoever was with him, I don't know if it was a friend or somebody, told him, "Nein, as they schaff me Geld, it's the only way to do it." He said, "That's the only way to get my sheets." He said, "Soll reden weiter? Let me talk weiter." Apropos to what Reb Shalom said, I think last week's parsha, the brachas on Yaakov were given to Yaakov wearing Bigdei Esav. So if nothing was sold commercially and everything was undertoned and so on, we'd say we have a chance. The fact is everything gets sold commercially as long as what happens in the Beis Medrash, like Shalom said, is Torah and rain. So fine, let this be the Mashchehu. If this is what's needed to get a person in, but whoever is giving over the Torah understands that he's also changing a value system along with it. Yes.
Not mamish to end justifies the means, but it's not. You're not so worried about the.
But if this is what's needed, getting a person into not only a Beis Medrash, but into an environment of Torah, that's so. What it, as long as it's within the realm of something.
Right. At the end of it, that has to happen. At this point, in fact, shed that skin. The Yaftalakim, the Yefes V'yishkim B'olei Shem, there it's B'olei Shem.
Yeah.
You've shed the skin of Yaftalakim, the Yefes. If it's not more than the same production happening here, that's not what we're talking about.
Right.
Okay, so we're going to end off with a question. I'm sure Rosh Yeshiva, who are experienced in sitting with people, understand that this question goes both ways. It's not unique to one spouse over the other, and it's really nageh in every community. I've been growing in Avodas Hashem for several years and learning in Yerushalayim. But my wife seems to have little interest in joining me on this journey, and if anything, she works against it. Is there an eitzah?
Whenever you have issues, even very firm issues between a husband and wife, a husband and a wife relationship is complex, and there's always a buildup of different feelings. And the fact that he's found a new hobby and something new and leaving me behind and making insinuations I'm not good enough, and it's not that he's such a big tzaddik, and when it comes to doing things in the house, he's not the biggest tzaddik, v'chulu, it's expected to create the problems. We're not talking about two boys in yeshiva and one is turned on and one not. You're talking about a complex relationship that has a lot of things built up in it. He would be very wise to work with somebody, because even the way you're presenting the picture, I could write a script. Since you write so many scripts, I could write the script the other way. My husband was always selfish, wasn't want nothing. He got into this Rebbe now, and he runs off to learn. And now he doesn't, if we ever had the only good time we used to have is doing this, and that he also doesn't do because he claims now he found God. And he's really a selfish person, cares about himself, and God is part of his selfishness. I could write that script, and you'd read that question at the next session. So I think they need to, speak with somebody who understands them both, where both feel they're understood and can guide them. Because there's a klal in Choshen Mishpat called a Mishana Yodal Tachtoina. He's made a radical change in the marriage. He needs to compensate.
That's called a radical change. Growing in Avodas Hashem is called a radical change. It's not built into the fabric of.
If you are kind of mildly orthodox and now you're running out of Shtaimel, it's a radical change. You might say it's the right thing, but it certainly is a change from.
No, it's not. That's not. Maybe the radical change is he wants to give it to the iPad. No more Netflix.
Let me chime in for a moment. This point is so important. This is the point I have, and I've had the experience with this shaila.
Yeah.
And I turned to the husband. It's a dangerous thing to say. I said, "You're so good, and you made decisions. Your mom is steigen. You know something? You made the change. That's not the man she married. You made the change. Be aware of that."
That's
Once
called,
you become
you're a different person. That's not the
Chalila,
person she
to
married.
minimize is aliyah, but that's
about
not the
Shuvah is
man.
called a Noilad Ben Chodesh. The Rambam says about Shuvah is like he's born from new. So, you know.
But what about, again, he doesn't want technology in the house anymore. We're done with that.
Giving
We're
a
not watching
specific
movies.
example, that's wonderful. A specific example, that's just for the moment. It's a change he made. She was married to him at this point. Till now, you were on the same plane as I, same plane, exact playing field as I was. That's exactly where you were. You made the change. You, the one who made the change, you have to be aware of the fact you've made the change. Now, that is to say like this. You found God. You're excited. At this point, you became, you're a firebrand. You're gewaldig. You're mamish taigen. It's true. It's real. But at the same time, the change you made, the moment you realize you made that change, you left her behind, of course there'll be resentment built up over here. It's pashut because it's not the man I married. Once you're fully aware of that, everything shifts. You have that awareness. She understands you're sensitive to that point. Sensitive to the point that you made the change, and therefore, I understand it's hard for you. You're not holding it where I'm holding. So she suddenly begins to respect the change and changes her attitude to what you've done as opposed to you're off and running. That's so important. I've had this bepoil. And as much as it sounded funny, I had this with Bali Tshuva, and when the Baal Tshuva is the husband, and the wife, I had both ways actually. The wife was not there yet. She was totally fry. And they came with issues, obviously. There's obvious issues over here. And I turned to him and I say, I commend you. And it's so dangerous to say, I'm the rabbi, Givaldik, you became frum. But you know something? You made the change. That's not the man she married. And here it's extreme, obviously.
So both Rosh Yeshiva here are saying that there is such a musik, there's such a concept, that one spouse could be at a different place spiritually than the other one, and that's okay.
And working together, that's okay. Of course it's okay, but it has to be mutual respect. You can't lessen the respect. Again, I'm sorry, I chimed in.
No.
But the respect has to be there. The covet has to be there. She has to respect and make that change. She's not there yet. And the question is how they work together and the things they do. You're giving a very specific example of no technology.
I don't know that this is.
Let's
take this
for a
people.
marshal where some shmear is there for the fact that he avoids the technology, and he's not coming down on her with a ton of bricks to make sure that she throws at her technology as well. That's fine. There's a certain amount where you know what the house looks like. You work it out. As long as you both appreciate and respect where you're coming from. I made the change, says the husband. Therefore, you have to understand the change, and I fully respect. It's hard if you make that change. You're not there yet. I'm sorry, I just jumped in.
First thing is you have a responsibility to keep the home together. You imagine. So let's take an example. Let's say a woman who grew up in a literature environment wearing a sheitel. Her husband decided sheitels are not good. He only a tichel, and he would like to wear a tichel. She resists, and he tells her, "You're a prutza, and you're this, and you're that, and you're going to Gehenim." And you can quote that there are 9,000 gedolim said things. What would you think that's like? Vice versa. I've had this many years ago. A woman called me. She married a husband. He's a frum doctor. He's a wonderful person. He supports kids in yeshiva, this and that. But she wanted better me. Yeshiva wanted to sit and learn and write traditions and that. What should her attitude be? Her attitude should be to respect him for what he is. And if you don't respect the other person, then what you're doing is the worst of both worlds. You need to understand you made a change. It doesn't mean she had to see it that way. She grew up with this was normal. There was a woman who married somebody who was kind of very cool and with it, and then he became very stark yeshiva person, and there was a picture of them at the chasna in the house, and so she looked the same, he looked different, and someone asked her, "Who's this?" It was kind of a strange question. I mean, it's a picture, and she said, "That was my first husband." So understand understand the responsibility of keeping a family together under extraordinarily difficult conditions. It's an achrayus to you, to your wife, to the children. Understand that unless you can understand the other person, respect the other person, and make the other person feel comfortable, it'll only create more and more resentment. You need to compensate for whatever you took away by showing that this process is making you more sensitive, more caring, that Ben Adam Chaver comes as a package with being religious, according to many shittas, and then kula heva ulai. But he needs to understand that, like exact kolam mishani al tachtayna, and as you know, he needs to understand that that's the way it's going to work. He's got the burden of making it happen and making it work.
Can we get one more question? Is it okay?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah, sure.
Good last question. Over the years that we've been doing this session, it's 5 or 6 years already, Baruch Hashem, there was a big chef of plenty financially for a long time now. For the last few years, there's been like this thing, and we were changed by it, everybody in their way. This question comes from a younger man, a few years after his chasna, and he lives in a prominent Torah community, surrounded by people like him who are still learning. How should an average, again, everyone has their own classification of average, I don't know where he's coming from. How should an average 24, 25-year-old guy be expected to stay in yeshiva, meaning Kail, or even be happy with himself learning when they see the crazy amount of spending that's going on? Their wives want, so they have no choice but to get the new car or the $600 pair of shoes. And you can hardly blame them because the pressure is enormous with what's going on around them. Again, I don't have the data, I'm just reading the question. What can possibly be told to these guys to make them happy about themselves and not always trying to live for who they are not? I would only say that I understand the question. I think it's coming from a place of reality.
It's a very difficult question because you're talking about a societal change, a societal shift. Meaning to say he's part of a society that indeed has changed the standards. Everything has changed. Everything has become something else. Now, obviously, they went through the dating process. You're talking about a younger man, you said 24, 25 years old. He's obviously a person at this point. So there were certain expectations, I hope, that were there and expected and spoken about when they went through the dating process and got married. Yes, indeed, society about them changes. At the same time, if he's committed to a certain amount of learning, that's what we looked for, like Tchila. I guess this is much more subjective as opposed to objective. It's very difficult to deal with this.
I'm sure there's yeshiva has things look one way when you're in the dorm, and they look another way when you're in a community where people are spending, and the frum community spends above its means. It's not a secret. It's not a side that would bring Megala over here that people are spending a lot more money than they can.
True. In other words, but she has to be on board with him. In other words, again, mutual respect is the most fundamental thing when it comes to a shidduch. Mutual respect. The fact is that she respects what he's doing. She really is machshav what he's doing, and she understands that being what he's doing is something he's limited as far as his funds are concerned. So she has to understand to live within the means itself. So as much as society about her,
but the things that people need that they didn't. Again, I don't have data. Go into Philadelphia Yeshiva and ask everyone to take off their hats this Shabbos. There's no more Stetsons. No one's wearing a Stetson. There's only going to be Borsalinos. Every single bacher from 9th grade all the way till the end is going to have a Borsalino. Why? It wasn't like that because. So whatever that Borsalino is, for women it's more. There's things that frum people sort of need, or else they're on the outs.
It's a difficult question to answer. In other words, insofar that you're trying to make a real change in his attitude or her attitude is what it is. So in a chanamitak, if they are living.
So what would Yoshiv tell his Talmud? You're in Kailul. What's the message to him? His wife really needs more, but he's sitting and learning. Erlich, what's the message to him? To make him happy, to give him.
I would try speaking to his wife.
Yoshiv would speak to his wife.
Yeah, sure.
And what would Yoshiv say to her?
I've tried to explain to her exactly, give him a few more years, a few solid years. It's so fundamental. It's what you need for the home. He needs it for his full development. He'll be there, Mitzvah Hashem, at one point. So as much as it's a veto on your part, the fact you're not going to get X, Y, or Z, which is totally expensive, but he needs it for his foundation. It'll be a totally different home if he has it for his foundation. It's not good to take him out of that mode of behavior, living at this point, because of the things that you need. And I understand, I'm not chalila minimizing the fact there are needs. That's how it is. Every lot of the fun of it. There's halachas, right? There are halachas of daimech soyrei. I understand that. But see what you can do to allow him another year or two in that mode. Very nice. Have her understand it.
Very nice. Shiva?
I would say the statement is a big generalization. There are many communities and sub-communities of people who really live sober lives with an ernstkeit, and without without a lot of the things you've mentioned, and like the Rambam says, a person is governed by society, and picking the society where you live, even in areas that are frum, there are different shades, and a person knows the houses are nicer here, but there are a lot of expectations. The houses here are kind of much more simple, or they're apartments, but it also is a more sober look at life. One of the decisions you make is where do you feel comfortable living? I tell when people ask, it's important to match a boy and a girl in what their expectation life is and so on. So the words don't mean much, but I think one of the best litmus test is where would you feel comfortable, 2 or 3 areas you'd feel comfortable living in, and 2 or 3 yeshivas you'd be comfortable sending kids to. That gives a sense of what a person wants. There are, Baruch Hashem, communities, many communities, and again, like sub-communities within New York, within Muncie, within this, you have plenty of sub-communities where life is simpler, expectation is simpler. I mean, one of the things, I grew up in Lower East Side, and I said there were many ways of rating kids. Who could beat up who was very important. Who could play better punch ball was important. Who got better grades was important. Money didn't exist. Everybody lived in a 3-room apartment. Nobody had a car. Everybody had the same sloppy stuff. And there was something very, very special about it. Finding an area where people have other ways of looking at life and what they value is important. That's part of the decision that you make. So yes, you might have a nicer house over here, but it comes with a package. And I think that could be a way to, the Chatchila set up a lifestyle that will allow you to live the life you want to live.
I just want to end off by saying I get emotional everywhere at the end of the session. The same word rings in my head every single time. Ashreinu Matayv Chalkeinu, that we have a community with Talmidei Chachamim, and everybody has a Talmid Chacham in the city, a Shiva, a Rosh Kollel, a Rav. You all went to yeshivas and you have Rebbeim. Ashreinu Matayv Chalkeinu, there are people who have the clarity and the confidence and the experience to be able to so easily and so calmly and so logically answer questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.